The recording then, provided that's okay with. Oh, you're on it.
Yep.
All right.
All right. Good afternoon. Today's May 1st. This is the meeting of the AI Advisory Council. And today we are going to have an agenda. You'll see it on screen. We're going to talk a little bit. First, we're going to skip minutes. We are still hoping for quorum, perhaps later in this meeting. Then we'll talk a little bit about an update to the guidelines put out on employee use of AI. We'll talk about its impact on some of the development that's been happening and revisit the IT paradigms that we talked about last time. And then, of course, we'll have public comment. I would like to ask if there's any member of the public, anyone who's present who's not a member of the council who would like to make a comment at the beginning of our meeting, so you don't have to stay for the whole thing, then you can do so. We'll take some time now. But for those who'd like to wait until the end of the call, we will also have time at the end. Okay, that silence was uncomfortable enough that we can move on. I am going to, I'm going to give it to Miles and Josiah to start us off on the updates.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And the first thing that I was hoping to discuss with Council today is that we have some proposed updates we've implemented to our employee guidelines on the use of generative artificial intelligence. So for context, our existing policy document on this topic was last updated in November 2023, which as far as AI technology is more or less several lifetimes. So I think that we're due for an update on this document. And really, there are three specific goals, which are relatively narrow in scope, which we were looking to implement here. So the first is to broaden the scope of this guidance document to include additional artificial intelligence modalities. So initially, the document was relatively narrowly scoped specifically to the AI chatbot modality, so Chat GPT, Gemini, Claude, so on and so forth. But in the time since this doc was last updated, we've seen a rise of significant other artificial intelligence modalities, which I think in many respects is just tied to the rise of increasingly integrated and agentic AI systems more broadly, which I know that we've talked about in past meetings. So really, for this first goal, my focus was on incorporating some additional guidance on meeting assistance and AI components embedded into other applications in particular, since I've received a number of questions from State of Vermont employees regarding best practices for those two modalities in particular. And then additionally, since we last updated these guidelines, we have obviously released Chat VT to State of Vermont employees, which is currently still in beta formally, but this internal chatbot that we have and the differing security and data governance requirements that we have for tools that we're running internally on our own State of Vermont networks versus public tools like ChatGPT, that differentiation, I think, does require some explicit policy guidance as well. And then thirdly, the last update is to expand the allowable uses that we reference in the AI citation matrix that's included in the guidance, which I think really is just to reflect the expanded capabilities of artificial intelligence for doing things like drafting correspondence and that type of thing. So really, our intent here with these updates is not to radically change the way that we're approaching employee use of generative AI or to significantly open opportunities for employees to be using public generative AI tools, but rather we really just want to expand the scope of this document to account for some of the additional artificial intelligence modalities and use cases and our increased adoption of internal AI systems in the time since the doc was last updated. So on the first goal, broadening the scope of guidance to include other AI modalities. Again, the two main components that we're looking at here are artificial intelligence meeting assistance and transcription tools, and then additionally AI features that are embedded in third-party applications. Just since, again, these are the two areas where it seems like we're seeing the most employee questions and uncertainty with respect to how to best handle these types of modalities with reference to our existing guidance. So on the AI meeting assistance and transcription tool side, these are specifically referring to third-party meeting assistants, which you've likely heard of, like Otter, Firefly.ai, and so on. This is really just a bucket of all of those different tools that can transcribe, summarize, or extract action items. As it says here, these present some particular and significant privacy and security considerations, especially if we're on calls where external non-state of Vermont participants are present and bringing these tools into the calls. And then additionally, if we're dealing with any employees who are using third-party transcription tools. So again, common examples there are Firefly, Otter, which itself has some pretty significant privacy concerns. And really, my intent with this element of the policy update is to give employees the authority to prohibit or require the removal of third-party meeting tools in particular during any call or meeting that they're administering that could potentially involve sensitive or non-public information. So for one example, I received an inquiry a few weeks ago from a state of Vermont employee who facilitates a meeting which is partially public, but also has a non-public conference component. And their concern was that some of the public participants to this meeting series, they sometimes bring these third-party AI transcription tools, and it's really challenging for the employee facilitating the meeting to determine whether or not these tools are present in the calls, and if so, whether or not they can be successfully disabled during the non-public component of the meeting as required per their statute. So really my intent here is to give employees clarity that they can exercise this authority to prohibit or remove third-party AI meeting tools really at any point.
So it all before works because of this magic ring. No, there's no such thing as magic. Intergalactic.
And we're just going to ask everyone to make sure that, thank you.
And really, we just want employees to be aware that they have the authority and ensure that they're comfortable exercising the authority to ensure that these types of third-party tools are removed at their discretion as required, depending on the security and confidentiality requirements for a given meeting. So really, the main point here is to ensure that employees are clear that they have that authority, and then additionally to ensure that they're aware of their responsibilities with respect to AI meeting tools. So namely, if any employee is themselves using a third-party meeting assistant, they need to ensure that any such tool that's being used in a given call is appropriate for the sensitivity of the content that's going to be discussed in the call. Really, any third-party meeting assistant is, in terms of how it's processing data, we more or less view these as congruent with other public AI tools like ChatGPT, where no sensitive or confidential state data can be input into these third-party meeting assistants. Employees also have a responsibility to ensure that external participants are aware of the state's policy on AI tool usage, either prior to or by the outset of the meeting. And then additionally, employees need to be aware that transcripts, summaries, or other AI-generated meeting records that are produced by these tools need to be treated as official records that are obviously applicable to the relevant retention or disclosure requirements for a given employee's organization. John, go ahead.
I just have a question. Like when the warnings come in, when you use whatever the Zoom or WebEx or whatever that says this is being recorded, you have, please, if that's not okay, please log off. Is it possible with the state's video conference to have that policy there? And in other words, so it doesn't have to be the whoever's running the meeting doesn't have to police that? Could that be automated, the warning?
That's a good question. We can look into it. I think usually the bots don't identify themselves other than in the name of the user, right?
Okay.
You'll see a user who's not on camera, and the name of it will be Josiah's Firefly bot or
Right.
whatever.
I wasn't thinking that this would be able to automatically police it, but it would make, like we're talking to a vendor or something else, it would at least, they would have to be aware that we don't permit that. So then you're counting on them to comply. I'm just thinking rather than have it be something that somebody has to say at the beginning of every meeting, I don't think you'd ever be able to outsmart them and find them, but you could at least state that what our policy is, just like the recording thing.
Yeah, that's a good thought. We'll look into whether we can have the policy pop up, at least for our main platforms. I think it is often okay to use third-party meeting assistants, right? Like usually it's fine, but it's when we're having a case management discussion or, for some other reason we're discussing something sensitive. That's when, you need to kick them out. As Miles said, sometimes there's some complexity because during the public part of a meeting, like this meeting, it would be fine. When we go into executive session, it would no longer be fine. So those are the kinds of scenarios we're trying to think through. But having the warning is reasonable.
But yeah, and thank you, John. That's a great question, and we'll look into whether or not we would be able to enable that type of consent warning, namely for the main platforms that we use for meetings, so Teams and Zoom for government. Yeah, I'll make a note to follow up on that. But yeah, the big picture on this AI meeting assistant side, the main risks that we're concerned about here are data exposure. So again, for these third-party meeting assistants, if a meeting does reference sensitive or confidential state data, obviously any audio or text data captured by these assistants can be transmitted to external servers, beyond the boundary of our state of Vermont tenant. Like Josiah mentioned, it can be challenging for employees to exercise direct administrative control or even visibility into whether or not these tools are actively recording for a given session. And then, the retention and secondary use policies for the third-party assistants, it's obviously going to vary depending on the vendor. So there can be, significant complexities there in terms of evaluating the privacy and data usage policies on a tool-by-tool basis. And then the other modality that I wanted to explicitly reference in the guidance is the rise of artificial intelligence features that are embedded in third-party applications. So as one example here, Adobe Creative Suite, it now has the capability to automatically generate a podcast from a PDF that you have open in the Adobe application. I just noticed this in my personal life. We don't have that enabled for state of Vermont employees, obviously. But we're seeing more and more embedded AI features like this across the enterprise applications that we use. And there are a number of benefits to these types of AI features, like improving the capability of search functions. But I think at a fundamental level, that same overall principle needs to apply, where employees need to be aware that they're responsible for ensuring that any feature they enable, they need to be making sure that that's only processing sensitive or confidential non-public data through approved secure channels only. So really the gist of the guidance on this point is that before enabling an embedded feature in a third-party application or requesting that it be enabled, employees are expected to confirm whether or not that feature transmits data to external servers, whether the data to be processed is appropriate for that tool to use, again, under the acceptable data usage element of this policy with respect to public AI tools. And I recognize here in particular that there's a lot of uncertainty, and it's inherently challenging for employees to be able to navigate the complexity of the privacy policies and data usage policies for these kinds of embedded AI tools. So I do not expect employees to be able to make this determination independently, and that the guidance does include an explicit call out that anybody who's uncertain about data handling practices for a given embedded AI feature needs to consult either with their ADS IT lead or ultimately with me as the director of AI. But I at least want to make sure that the policy is referencing these types of embedded AI features, since we're seeing them more and more across virtually every application that folks are using these days. So does anybody have any thoughts or questions just regarding the intent? Oh yeah.
Let me, if I can chime in for just a second. I wanted to, for the record, say we did make quorum now, so we are in an official meeting at this point. And as one of the chairs, I would like to put out to the council that we allow members of the public to comment throughout the course of this meeting. If anyone has issues with that, please let me know. Okay, no one has issues with that. And with that, I'll recognize Mr. David Kaiser.
I'll get rid of my hand eventually. So, question for you, Miles, I guess, on your guidance. Are you considering data processing location and terms of use from the vendor? Maybe the model might be an opt-in instead of an opt-out as we give guidance to employees.
Yeah, so that's data residency requirements. That's absolutely something that we consider as we're evaluating whether or not we're comfortable authorizing a given tool for employee use. I don't explicitly mention that in the guidance, but I think that would be a good call out just to make employees aware of as a consideration.
And I guess the foundation for that question is when we looked at Outer AI originally, we found terms of use that we did not like, and we basically said no, primarily, if I remember correctly, about data processing location. But I think, and it's been a bit, so don't hold this as 100% surety, but I think they revised their terms of use at a later date, and then we were less likely to object at that point. Still don't love them as a rule, but that's just, based on my role. So there you go.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I'll add an element to the guidance mentioning that data residency risk is one of the potential risks for both the AI meeting assistance and transcription tools, and then additionally embedded AI features. Because I agree that is obviously from our perspective as decision makers, that's critical. But I think it's good for employees to at least be aware of that as a factor to consider.
Yeah, and sorry, I just reminded myself of this while we were talking. Data ownership is interesting too, because some entities will claim ownership just because they processed it one way or another, right? That's it.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Miles, I'm sorry. I'm still stuck. Did you say generate a podcast from a PDF?
Yeah. I saw that the other day, just on my personal laptop with an update that Adobe pushed out. I'm struggling to think of a single use case where that would possibly be relevant. I suppose maybe if you had, a PDF of a book or something and you wanted to be able to listen to it instead of reading it. But at any rate,
this is not official business, but this is great when you're like, this is a bill and I need to walk through.
That's true.
Let me put it on in the background, right? That type of thing I use. Not
or I'm even
super
thinking,
often, but it's helpful.
I'm even thinking, I wonder if you're the kind of person who treats podcasts kind of like an RSS feed, then maybe if there's some emergent document that comes up, like an announcement or some kind of program update or whatever, and it's written in PDF form, but it can be generated as a podcast episode that people subscribe to. I don't, that seems clunky, but anyway, I just want to make sure I heard
Yeah,
you correctly. It seems like nothing is sacred anymore.
indeed. Yeah, and I have I've used similar features from tools like Notebook LM, for circumstances where I have a journal article or something that I am interested in learning about, but say I'm putting one of our kids to bed and I can't necessarily sit there and read it. It can be helpful to be able to listen to that kind of content.
Mhm.
But yeah, I feel like relative to how rapidly vendors are expanding this type of functionality, I think that many of the end user use cases are kind of limited compared to how these features are being marketed. But
Okay. Thanks for the detour.
so then the next modification to the guidance is to explicitly differentiate between public and internal AI systems. So public AI tools, again, were the initial modality that this guidance was designed to address back in 2023. And obviously that there's a significant difference in terms of the data governance requirements for public tools like ChatGPT, which are externally hosted, um, you know, or AI meeting assistants that are hosted by third-party vendors like Otter and so on. Since with these types of public tools, we have considerably less oversight in terms of how specifically the third-party vendors are processing their data, what their data residency restrictions are. And so as a result, our guidance for public AI tools is remaining essentially unchanged. And the central element there is that non-public information cannot be entered into or processed by any public AI tools, because anything that gets input to these tools de facto becomes public. And we've seen that many of the public AI vendors like Anthropic and OpenAI and so on, they're adding privacy settings that users can select to disallow the use of their data for training future models. I still place relatively low trust in that type of setting, and I absolutely do not think that that from a data governance perspective would be sufficient to allow any type of non-public data to be input into those tools, just because we would be placing so much trust on these vendors to ensure that that data is still being used appropriately. So big picture for public AI tools, no change in the guidance. Non-public information is not allowed for upload or ingestion into those systems. But we specifically wanted to differentiate internal AI tools. So ChatVT is one example. Given that these are hosted on our internal network and we have significantly more data governance controls in place. So for ChatVT, for example, we have a zero data retention policy in place with Microsoft and Azure, so that they're not logging or storing any user data on their end for any type of monitoring purpose. Additionally, we have a lot more insight into their data residency requirements. And per our agreement with Microsoft, we are confident that the data being processed by the underlying Azure Foundry model is limited only to our US East region. So that these internal tools give us a lot more flexibility for using most types of sensitive or confidential state data, with a couple of restrictions that we still have in place, particularly for highly sensitive data types that still have a federal statutory audit requirement. And I gave the example in the guidance of ChatGPT as an internal tool. We are currently piloting Microsoft Copilot, which is comparable from a data security perspective. And big picture, since we are making these kinds of tools increasingly available to employees, again with many of the same guardrails in place. So still requiring supervisory approval. We're not just allowing employees to download and use their own quote unquote internal AI tools. But we've had a number of questions over the past couple months regarding the difference in the underlying security requirements between internal AI tools and public tools, which our guidance was originally targeted towards. So I thought that adding some clarity to differentiate between these two buckets of AI tooling made sense for the guidance moving forward. Before we move on, does anybody have any thoughts or questions on this point? So then the last significant update to the guidance is essentially expanding the allowable uses, which are referenced in the AI citation matrix that's on the last page of the guidance document. Essentially, all we did here was shift each of these columns more or less just one row to the right. And that is, in recognition of the fact that AI capabilities for things like brainstorming and collaborative writing have gotten a lot stronger. So from my perspective, previously our guidance disallowed, the use of 50-50 collaborative AI writing for things like public-facing press releases. Given how AI capabilities have expanded, in terms of generating effective, readable, natural language since 2023, I am now comfortable with that type of 50-50 usage, again, provided those materials are cited. So again, we're really just shifting everything here, one column to the right, recognizing that 100% AI generated content is still not acceptable in most use cases outside of ad hoc emails or chats, if employees are using artificial intelligence to quickly surface information, provided they're still citing that usage. So big picture, that the aim here is just to make it a little bit easier for employees to use AI for these kinds of tasks, where it's safe for them to do so. And again, it's not a significant change for 100% AI generated content. Outside of highly specific ad hoc use cases, we're still not comfortable with that for most uses. But big picture, does this update make sense? And does anybody have any questions on this point?
Miles, I'm wondering if we clarify like person-to-person emails or something just to narrow that a little bit farther. I don't love having emails, which are often public records, potentially being 100% AI generated. But I take your point about like there's also just a lot of things where that may not be a problem. Other than that, like I do appreciate shifting things generally to the right. I think it broadly feels good to me. But let's see, I think Rose has her hand up, so go ahead, Rose.
This is just something I wanted to ask, or might be good to think about as you guys consider these differences in the citation requirements. We at AOT are very like verbal or like oral tradition type of agency, and one of the things that we're trying to do is like this knowledge management refresh of our pipeline that's like an AI enabled pipeline that like we would take the transcripts and then turn that into documentation. I struggle with those types of use cases to understand where on the percentage that comes from, right? If the transcript is all stuff that we said, like is that in the less than 25% AI? It feels like you're closer in the 75% to 100% because it's interpreting and adding so much flavor to it when it goes into documentation. But I think that's like a super relevant use case, especially as we consider Copilot coming in. I think meeting recaps and like using those for meeting minutes, like that's something we've definitely explored with our Copilot testing licenses. Where do those types of like transcription to documentation fall in this? Because I think that's a really hard spot. And then my second ask, if you guys are like thinking about this, is like to also really consider where supervisory approval is required of use cases. I think it's unrealistic to expect, for every email to get a supervisor to approve that piece of it. And so I think one of the things that we've been talking about at AOT is adding expectations around AI usage in performance management, because I think that's a way that doesn't feel like overbearing or too micromanaging, and sets a clear expectation that these things are acceptable to do and these things are not acceptable to do. But I think right now, the way it's worded, some people definitely interpret it that like every task that they ever touch AI with would need supervisory approval. And I think that makes it hard to actually implement. So there are just two things that in the guidance, those are things that I would really like you guys to think about as you're updating it. And so just wanted to raise it up to you all since you're talking about it. So
Yeah, these are great questions, and I'd love to have the council weigh in on them. I think there were two there, Miles, if you can make sure that they're, yeah, I think you've got them both there. Topic one, transcription, and when does transcription need to be cited, and is there any limitation on using transcription? I kind of want to handle that a bit differently from this, or maybe give it its own column, or something. I'm not sure exactly, but let's have some discussion there. And then supervisory approval. I guess I'll start with my thoughts on supervisory approval, and then maybe we'll start with that one and then move to transcription. So the way that we structured supervisory approval was kind of intentionally leaving it up to the supervisor, that if the supervisor wanted to say, you can use AI this one time, and the next time you do this task, I want you to check with me again, the supervisor could say that. Or once the supervisor has built up, confidence that this employee is doing this well, the supervisor could make the decision about, you can use AI to do this kind of a thing whenever it comes up. And that's intentional because generally supervisors and managers control the method that people use to do their daily work. So that's where we had started. I'm open to broadening that, but it's kind of that was why we did that. It was intentionally to give the supervisors the latitude to decide whether this was a one-time thing or you can do this for this type of a task whenever you want. But I'll toss that out to others, how you're handling it in your teams, for those who are state employees and even for those who aren't. How are you thinking about supervisory approval for AI usage? Go ahead, Amanda.
I think what's hard is that there are differing levels of AI literacy among supervisors and managers as well. So their level of comfort and approval may come from their knowledge themselves. And we see differing opinions on the use between employee and supervisor. So if they disagree and the employee thinks it's fine and the supervisor doesn't, even if it is allowable just because of people's own maybe used to doing things a certain way, right? I just think that there is it's a little nuance there, but I think that's hard to like describe that. We've generally said if the state says it's okay, it's technically okay, but a supervisor saying no when it's okay, I think is hard unless it's something that follows like that's outside appropriate use, right? So that's where it's like tricky if the supervisor is just because they don't ethically, it doesn't fit with their ethical morals. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or they don't want to
that's
depend
okay.
on that to get the work done. That's all.
Yep. Okay. Susanna?
Yeah, I think Amanda raises a really great point. And the other thing that I was thinking about, and I'm sorry if this actually was covered, I don't think that it was, but is standardizing what we mean when we talk about supervisory and managerial roles, because there are teams where one, I'll use my own office as an example. I have direct reports and then I have indirect reports. So there's another layer of supervision between us. And so who counts as a supervisor or the supervisor? Because for some of my staff, I would need to be the person approving. And for others, it might be someone else, but I would be approving that person's work normally. So, when are they the decision? If you're someone who's sort of in the middle in a management role, when are you the decision maker? And when are you the person who needs to get approval from someone else? And how do we manage that? So I think that might, in a vertically oriented org chart, like state of Vermont, how is that clarity on that, I think people would appreciate.
So what I'm thinking, and I'd love for other people to weigh in on this, is maybe we have a new section, and maybe we get this round out and then kind of fast follow with a new section that says something like, I have an idea I want to use AI for. Who do I need to ask? And try to clarify that there. And paired with, or maybe in lieu of, I could do either way, guidance specifically to supervisors, because I do really lean on supervisory judgment to say, you really shouldn't use AI to review this thing, because this one's, we know there's going to be a freedom of information type request. We know this one is going to be like heavily scrutinized. You need to really not use AI for this one. And I rely on the supervisors to have the spidey senses about that, about when it would be not in the best interest of building trust is one of our core values. So that, I guess those are two sections, Miles, maybe for your notes. But would love to have other folks weigh in. And it looks like Robert is going to do just that. Go ahead, Mr. Robert Deffer.
Thank you very much. So just from an attorney perspective, as the counsel for the council, so to speak, any use case we have that, as I saw in the chat, talking about how can this be used for evaluations, for example. So any use case we have that has potential legal implications, someone will absolutely screw it up, and someone will absolutely put us in a liability position. So, I just offer that as something to think about as we're talking about use cases and that type of thing. I have no doubt that whatever use case it is, the responses we will get if someone gets asked, is there something questionable, even though we tell them there's always got to be a human in the loop, even though we tell them it's always got to be evaluated by a person, we have to, I would encourage rather, as we're thinking about this, design it to the fail, right? Because the fail is going to happen in the human orientation of it. And, that's where the liability is going to come.
Thank you, Robert. John?
Kind of picking up on what Amanda sort of brought up about, if you have to go to a supervisor, that person may have different levels of knowledge or different beliefs and the gray area there. I'm kind of concerned on this allowable uses in AI citation that there's the less than 25%, 50%, 75%. I'm right now at MIT at a workshop on AI and just saw a very interesting talk where people under attribute the contribution of AI in their writing. So the more they use it, the more they say, no, I did 80% of that. So given that that's is easy to underestimate or to give yourself more credit, and given that it's very hard to figure out where that bar would be, I feel pretty uncomfortable about having different, I think we need a better definition than percentage of the words. Or I think given what the last speaker said is that if it's ever questioned, I do not think we would be able to defend, oh, that was 25%, not 50%.
What have you got thoughts on an alternative?
So I'd be happy to. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I don't. So
I've thought that the same thing with respect to these percentages, since we're including these quantifiable percentages here, but innately in actual real world use cases, I don't think that that's actually really quantifiable by end users. And I'd definitely be curious to take a closer look at the study that you mentioned, because I mean that's certainly in alignment with my experience using AI and interacting with others who do. And I wonder if it might be better to just remove that attempt to quantify the percentage, and just provide some additional guidance in natural language on what brainstorming or generating a first draft using AI looks like versus, what it looks like to more closely collaborate with an AI system to generate some type of writing output versus, what it actually looks like in practice to take AI output and then edit it as a human, rather than including the percentages. Because I feel like that would almost be easier for users to understand, since, anybody who's using artificial intelligence is likely at least, familiar with brainstorming or first drafting as a concept versus editing content as a concept. So yeah, I guess that's all to say that I see where you're coming from on the percentage side.
Yeah, I don't have a good, let me give it some thought and let me see if I can find the slides that were just presented. But I think maybe where you were just going is like, it's kind of like, did I write a draft and it was revised by AI, or did AI completely synthesize it? That might be the only distinction you can make. Who wrote the first word? No, I even that's a little bit weird. Gosh, I wouldn't even think about, sending in a reference letter or something like that without running it through AI at this point. But gosh.
I think we have a comment about that in chat as well from Jim. AI writing and marketing have been demonstrated to be considerably more persuasive than human written materials. And I think that's exactly what you're getting at, right? Like, yes, it's more persuasive, more effective. The initial idea of including those percentages were because we didn't know what generative modalities were going to look like, right? We were writing this in late 22, early 23. And those modalities were, we took a guess at brainstorming, drafting versus collaborative writing versus human editing. And then try to put the percentages as a catch-all. Maybe we have outgrown them and just those headers would be enough. Yeah, it's interesting. Amanda, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say at VDH we kind of struggled a little bit with the percentages because we have a lot of data nerds and we knew they were gonna get like very stuck on the details. So something that we did is sort of thought it through of like, if you were working on a project with a human, at what point is it not your project? Or if you are drafting something and you're having someone review it, at what point would you give them credit? So that's sort of how we like approached it, to try to explain to people, like, if you wrote something and you literally just asked AI to make sure you didn't use words that maybe we shouldn't be using anymore, you probably don't need to give it credit because who wrote it? You did. You were just using it. It's like if you had someone else review it, right? So that's sort of what we said to get rid of the percentages, but with doing exactly this, just doesn't have the percentages. And I think that kind of made it helpful for people to understand in like a real world way.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. That's almost how I've come to think about this topic. It reminds me of working on group projects in academia, or writing materials where I'm citing the work of other people. And that just the idea, I think, really makes sense to me. Like, if I'm writing something with the assistance of an AI system and I'm passing that content off as my own, would that raise, plagiarism flags if I was doing that with another person and passing their content off as my own instead of, using the content generated by the AI system? I really appreciate that call out. I think that's a good way to think about this as well. Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments or ideas on this slide? Yeah, Josh? Sorry, your audio isn't coming through.
Okay, that should work.
Yes.
So yeah, the current matrix is focused on text. And so there was a earlier comment, and then I just dropped in one around video or image generation. I think image generation is a really common use case where it's showing up in slideshows frequently, and it's really useful in that capacity. But it probably should always have a citation. That's my opinion. But it would be nice to have an official position on that.
That's a good point. I think because there's image editing, right? We have similar concepts, right? I took the picture and I edited it. I took the picture and said, generate me an image that's like this, or generate me some stock imagery for this type of a purpose. Kind of as parallel 3 tiers to what we have here. Did someone else have a hand up? I thought I saw. Rose. Thank you.
No, I just wanted to add to, and maybe this is where it's like we update this as it lives on and as the technology moves on. But I do think, if Copilot is going to be something that we deploy, I think having some of the pieces about Copilot Studio and some of the like chat bot pieces is also, I don't know what it feels like it's a can of worms that similar to images. It's just a different style or a different form or fashion that you would interact with it. And I can see people, even if it doesn't end in an end product, right? I think that's where it's like this feels very like deliverable based. What is the use guidance in process based work? And that's where again it feels like a little bit of a different type of matrix or format, similar to the image generation, but it is a question that I think as we look at like process automation, where is the line there? Especially if I'm going to run something through like Miles with like Rafers, some of Rafers examples where we're taking like sentiment analysis, creating classified data out of that. That's all interpretation being done by the AI in an automated process, right? So that to me, in this sense, would feel like that's 100% AI content because the AI is making the classification bins. I don't think that should be off limits. I think that's a super helpful way to use AI, but I do think if I was trying to fit that into this matrix and that's all we had, I think I would have to go with 100% AI content because it's deciding the bin,
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And I mean, particularly for processes that are including AI systems, we definitely do see it as central. It is an inherent requirement that any type of process that's incorporating an AI subcomponent, just from a process governance perspective alone, that needs to be documented, with some form of continuity plan in place, so that if another employee were to pick up that process, they would need to be aware of, where that AI component was sitting and what precisely it was doing in terms of informing the process's output. And so I'd previously thought about that specific topic from more of a process governance perspective rather than a citation or attribution perspective. But I mean, that's a really interesting point. And I do think that it would make sense to account for that as well. So yeah, thank you for raising that.
Yeah, that would be awesome to get, even if it's not a matrix or something. I think that's one of the questions that we've had on our side is like, we run so many Power Automate flows. And I think including it in a documentation feels very comfortable as opposed to how you read the code of ethics. I would read the code of ethics in the guidance document we have now, that I would have to display basically a splash message to the user saying, hey, AI is involved here. I think in documentation, is much more comfortable as opposed to figuring out a mechanism to like every time it runs, ping the user like, hey, AI is being used here,
Yeah. And I do think for any type of analytical output that will ultimately be constituent facing, if AI is involved in that, it would certainly need to be cited. But yeah, how to best inform internal users for AI augmented analytical processes. Yeah, that's an interesting point. So. Any other thoughts or questions on this slide? So I know that we have just about 5 minutes left, and this is sort of a natural stopping point for this topic. So I would be happy to hand it over to the co-chairs if you.
I think I want to circle back on next steps. I think here's what I'm thinking, and other counselors feel free to chime in. I think what I would like to do is have Miles, you work on the text-based matrix as we've discussed here, because I would like to get the changes out that enable the clarify the use of note-taking, clarify the use of some of the other pieces. So get kind of that minimum set of changes out in short order, so that the council can adopt that version next month. And then work on transcription, other types of content generation, and that more process-based guidance, including the supervisory clarifications and things like that. That's kind of how I'm seeing the split, is let's get one set of things up, and then I think that body of things may take us a month or two to sort out, and I'd like to get some stuff done by the end of the fiscal year, and then maybe target August for updates to cover more of the supervisory guidance and those types of things. Does that make sense to the council, or would you prefer to do it as a single package? Am I lost?
It makes sense to me.
Okay. Thank you, Susanna. All right. So we'll proceed in that direction as soft guidance, not an official decision. But we'll be voting on that next month. And then proceed with the next version in short order. I think at this point, then we will open it up for additional public comment. I know we've had public comment sprinkled throughout the discussion, but if folks have other things they would like to discuss, or if people are aware of interesting AI related things that are happening that we should know about for the good of the group, happy to entertain those too. Open it up to you all. Just raise your hand or drop a comment in chat, and I'll recognize you. Rose, go ahead.
Yeah, this is just an update. I mentioned a little bit in my comments before, but we are awarding a research grant to UMass Amherst to do a 2-year research project with AOT on our knowledge management pipeline. And so what they'll be doing is using a UMass Amherst's AI platform that essentially will evaluate a standardized set of prompts to create like a consistent output based on like our requirements. They're going to create that like standard prompt library, and then we're going to evaluate against the different models, including Anthropic models and OpenAI models. So I think that's just something very interesting that I think the council and ADS would be like interested to see. We're going to track like credit consumption and like accuracy and overall user feedback from the output. So it's going to be like a really interesting study. It's more of like an academic style, but I think it'll be really good for like operationalizing some of our AI enabled knowledge management practices. So I'm super excited for it. I just wanted to like, yeah, speak a little bit so that you all know it's happening. So
Great, thank you. We'd love to hear more about that as it progresses. Rick, over to you.
Thanks. Nothing to announce, just to introduce myself, Rick Plasanza, first time I've attended this meeting. I'm the VP of Information and Operation Systems at Helen Keller International, but I'm here today just as a resident of Vermont and living in Virgins. And I had a call recently with Josiah and Miles, and I'm just curious about the work of this group. I've been spending a lot of my private time thinking about AI in Vermont, but not so much in the government context, as much as sort of small business and nonprofits, and I'm looking to generate some ideas on that. None of that's a topic for today, but again, I just wanted to introduce myself and say thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. And John.
Kind of in the spirit of what are we all working on? I know because of public meeting laws, we have to be careful about what we share, but is there some way we could share like what we're reading or book recommendations or things like that? I'm just reading a bunch of AI books, and I would also like other people's suggestions. Like, is there some sort of publicly viewable thing that we could all put suggestions?
You can feel free to hit this list with an email. I think that's fine. Those are
so that doesn't
public records, but aren't.
Yeah, is that okay? Does that violate?
Yeah, no, it doesn't violate the law. It's just, if someone requested that, you'd have to produce them if someone wanted to see them, which is fine.
Okay, I'd be very interested. I'll do that and be very interested in hearing what other people are reading.
Cool. Thank you, John. And Jim.
Yeah, thank you. As with the previous speaker, I just wanted to introduce myself as well. First time attending this. I'm Jim Tremarky. I'm the Director of Planning for Southwestern Vermont Healthcare. As healthcare advances, the opportunity for AI in healthcare is giant. So, paying attention to what you folks are doing is going to be helpful to us and making healthcare more affordable in Vermont. With regards to John and books, I mean, no offense to you, John, at all, but if you're reading a book, you're already behind the times, because by the time the thing is already printed, the world of AI is already advanced beyond it. There were 8 new AI models, iterations of AI models from the top 4 frontier labs in the last 8 weeks. So it's not going to print, it's going online, and you got to stay up with it fast. Sorry to
definitely. No, definitely agree with that. I wasn't trying to learn about it. I was just thinking about, governance and further thinking, futurist thinking. I live that every day, what you're saying. I use models that are, days old, and what I learned last month is already out of date. But I'm not talking about how-to books. I'm talking about sort of societal books. But that's also true. Yeah. Good point, though.
All right. Well, thank you all. Appreciate all the public comments this time. This is great. And thank you all for your engagement and attending, and look forward to seeing you next month. We meet first Fridays in general. I know we had one off cycle recently. So if you need to catch the rerun of that, it's up on YouTube. But look forward to seeing you all next month. And thanks all very much. Have a good Friday.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.